So could you tell us how you're connected to the USGS's shakeout earthquake scenario?
Well, it's been a 20-year partnership, starting with the earthquakes in 1987, the Whittier quake, and on through our planning and readiness for the San Andreas fault scenario, which began right around 1988 for us. And really in the last 2 years with this shakeout study, we've concentrated that and taken it to a new level with the new science coming out of this study and the integration and bridging that we've done. So it's been about 2 years of intense partnership now on this shakeout scenario.
And how is your department using the science from the shakeout scenario?
Well, the Los Angeles County Fire Department and the other fire departments across Southern California have recognized that this is a tool to allow us to plan for catastrophic level disaster that we've never had before. We have a tool now that is vetted by the science element of our USGS partnership. It is a realistic study. It's the most likely scenario. It's giving our decision makers the ability to plan based on what is likely to happen. It's almost assuredly going to happen at some point in our future. So it's a great planning tool, and that's the way we're using it.
And what does it mean to you that this is based on real science, real research?
Well, the one thing that has come about is the realization you can't ignore this study. The shakeout study, when you read it and you realize that it's not a worst case scenario. It's the most likely scenario when this fault ruptures. You know, it may not happen exactly like we've postulated in the shakeout, but it's going to be something like that. And we know that there could be something far worse than that, which would be that event happening on a Santa Ana wind day when we have 60 and 70 mile an hour Santa Ana winds blowing and the temperature is 105 degrees and humidity is down to 4 or 5%. That's going to be a worst case scenario. Another worst case scenario would be if it happened during the middle of a wildfire disaster that's already happening in Southern California, like we saw in 2007, where the resources are already stretched thin, and then you have an earthquake disaster. So the shakeout study is not the worst case scenario, and what that tells the planners and the decision makers is that they've got to be ready for this and keep in mind some out-of-the-box solutions for these possibly worst case scenarios.
So when you get this kind of information coming across your desk collectively, it's very compelling for you.
The one thing about the shakeout study is when you sit down and read it and absorb it, you can't ignore the message. The message simply can't be ignored that we are in line in the direct path of a major event coming our way that we know is going to occur. And it's going to have implications Southern California-wide, nationwide, and actually worldwide in terms of the economic and other impacts that would happen. But you can't ignore reading about potentially up to equivalent of 133,000 structures burning to the ground on a day when there's no Santa Ana winds blowing, or thousands of structures collapsing, including possibly a number of high-rise buildings. You can't ignore those things, and it's telling us that we have to be ready for something on a magnitude that we have never experienced before in our lifetimes. And that's what it's doing.
Speaking of that integrated approach, could you talk a little bit about your involvement with the Southern California Multi-Hazards Demonstration Project?
Yeah, the LA County Fire Department and the other fire service agencies in Southern California, they are truly all-risk response agencies. We get pretty much every kind of disaster you can have, with the exception of probably hurricanes here. And even those we respond to in other parts of the country. Our departments are involved with the FEMA Urban Search and Rescue System, and internationally with the U.S. Agency for International Development. Some of our fire departments are on contract to respond internationally. So we truly are all risk, and we've recognized early on, for years we've known that the bridging between science and response in all these different realms, whether it's landslides, flooding, winter storms, the earthquakes, and other natural hazards, that yields positive results in our planning and our readiness to respond. So the multi-hazards project to me is the next generation of where we need to go with our disaster planning. It's preparing not just the response agencies but also the public to be ready for pretty much the whole range of risks that we have. And the other thing that happens here is that, one of the kind of unspoken things that has occurred is that we started in 1987 getting ready for earthquakes. That evolved this system called Urban Search and Rescue, which is now a worldwide system. And it started the concept was to be ready for earthquakes and also hurricanes. That was the original priority. Then when the Oklahoma City bombing happened, we saw those same exact teams that were established for earthquake response, basically, and hurricane response, brought in to conduct search and rescue operations in the aftermath of a huge terrorist attack. And then the 9/11 attacks in the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, the same teams that were originally set up for earthquake and hurricane response went to work and performed beautifully in terms of, in a tragic situation, they were able to recover rescue everyone who could be rescued alive, recovered those who couldn't be rescued alive successfully without further loss of life in sometimes operations that lasted weeks afterwards, around the clock. Very dangerous conditions, and the fact that we had brought in these teams that consisted of structural engineers, doctors, search and rescue specialists from the fire service, canine teams, and brought it in as a collaborative team that could either to respond to an earthquake or a man-made disaster like a terrorist attack. What it's showing us is there's a big circle here of learning. And the things we learned in those terrorist attacks, responding to the 9/11 attacks and the Oklahoma City bombing and the other ones, that is also being applied to the next earthquake disaster. The tools that have come out of our experiences in those events, the lessons learned, the strategic planning and changes that we've done in terms of our strategy and tactics, that's going to be applied to the next big earthquake where we have building collapses and so forth on even a larger scale than any terrorist attack we've ever seen in world history. So this is a big circle that's coming back right around to the beginning again.
So for you, what is the most inspiring or the thing that gets you most excited or that you're most proud of about the ShakeOut?
Well, I think the thing that I'm most proud of is the fact that we've been able to take scientists, engineers, and firefighters and other emergency responders who often don't talk to each other on a daily basis, and now they're talking. So we've got a bridging system now. We have great lines of communication that are allowing us to really discuss the issues in ways we haven't had before, and look at solutions from a holistic viewpoint, not just from each different perspective by themselves, but altogether, what are the best solutions for this big problem, which is the San Andreas Fault sitting out there like the sword of Damocles hanging over our heads here, which we know is going to drop at some point, and how we're going to deal with that.